Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the I Will Aim podcast. Our topic for today is invincible to influential, how to advocate for yourself and reach the next level in your career. Many professionals work incredibly hard, deliver great results, and still feel stuck. They know they're capable of more, but remain trapped in execution while other people move into strategic role. The problem often isn't talent, it's visibility, positioning, and the ability to advocate for ourselves. In this episode, Maya Sharfi will help us explore how ambitious professional can break out of career plateau, gain clarity on what's next, and develop the skill needed to step into the next role. Thank you, Maya. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here.
Let's start with a quick introduction.
I am a career and executive coach. I specialize in working with women who are trying to make it to the next level of their career. But today's conversation is going to be relevant to people no matter their background. My background is actually in design. I was trained as a designer, but
Mm.
my mom is a social worker. Pretty much since middle school, I've been bringing together groups of people to facilitate conversations and talk about how we could all grow. And I had a side project when I was in grad school where I started teaching women how to advance their careers, and then I ended up loving it, and it ended up being a side path for me that became my main path. So
Wow, that's an incredible story. The side path become the main path. So listen, so everyone listening out there, don't think that your side path can't be your main path, right? That's in a way it's finding your passion. Many professionals reach a point in their career, they feel stuck. But what are the common signs that you're really stuck?
yeah, so a couple of common signs are that you watch other people get promotions and they seem to have less experience than you, less education than you, and you wonder why they get chosen. You might be in a company that publishes its leveling criteria. So, what do you do at each level? What do you need to do to be considered? And you feel like you've fulfilled all the criteria, but it's not happening. Maybe you've even gone to your bosses and you've said, "Hey, what do I need to do to get to the next level?" And they say, "Oh, you're doing fine," or, keep doing what you're doing, or they give you some really vague feedback and it doesn't feel actionable. Those are usually the signs that there's some kind of unwritten rule that you don't know about that is keeping you where you're at.
I think those are great example of what a stuck feels like. If we have a listener out there right now that's listening, and they're experiencing and feeling all of those, and those are the things that's happening to them. How do they get started with kind of moving themselves along and advocate for themselves?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I want to share is that there's a mistake that many of us make, and I think women are more likely to make this than men just because of how women are socialized to be a little bit more oriented towards like following the rules and respecting authority figures. But there's this cardinal sin that oftentimes we make when we want to get promoted, where we go to our boss and we say, "Hey, what are the steps to get to the next level?" And it turns out that it's a real catch 22, because if we go to our leaders and we say, "Oh, what are the steps?" What they are often thinking, but they're not going to share with us, is they're thinking, "Well, if you need me to spoon feed you the steps, then you're not really
Mm.
leadership material." And so usually what you'll hear is, "Oh, you're doing everything great," or you'll hear something vague. And sometimes the vague thing is something you really do need to work on. Like I had a client who was told, "Oh, you need to be more visible in the company," but she didn't really know what that meant, right? But so what sometimes is happening is just the very way that you ask that question, it kind of puts you on the non-promotable list because it's not in alignment with the qualities that are the qualities of someone who does get promoted. And so, yeah, we can talk about what to do instead, but I just wanted to speak that because if anybody's done it, first of all, let it go. Don't feel shame. You didn't know, right? You did what you knew how to do with your current thoughts. But second, and it is fixable, it is recoverable, but it's this kind of hidden almost catch 22 that can keep people stuck that people may be doing. And I wanted to speak to that first.
Well, thank you for highlighting that because at times people don't think that that question that they ask would lead to a different outcome. How do we best ask that question?
Yeah. So the process that I recommend is something called leadership conversations. And it starts with first, before you even go into a conversation with anybody, right? Your boss, other promotion influencers, and decision makers, You actually start by identifying the role that you want next. It's either on the ladder or it might be something that you pitch, right? I do a lot of work with clients looking at what drives them. And sometimes we even pitch a role and then thinking, if I was in this role already, how would I be thinking about it? What problems would I be solving? Where would I would go when I went into conversations with people a level up? How would I be holding myself and presenting myself? And then I recommend setting up conversations with people who are promotion, who like your boss or anyone who can promote you or anyone who influences that decision or people who know about that decision. And then you want to go in saying, here's the level that I want to get to. Here's the value I think I could add. Here's my thoughts about how to get there, right? Here's how I'm thinking about it. What do you think? And what you're doing when you do that is that you're showing up in a proactive way, right? You're kind of leading the conversation, but you're also not just kind of going and being like, promote me, right? I demand to be promoted because that also backfires. And
Yep.
you're creating space for them to find out what is wrong about your theory, right? It might be that your pitch for the role, or they might be closing that whole division that you wanted to grow into and lead. And so you're creating a space to find out what I call the unwritten rules, because there really are things that will never be on the matrix that tells you what happens at every level that need to get revealed, and you're not going to be able to reveal them unless you're in a conversation where you're coming in as a leader, right, with proactivity, but you're also creating psychological safety for the person on the other side to fill in the blanks and tell you where your assumptions might be off or to let you know how things really work.
I like the fact that you mentioned focus on the role that you wanted and sort of think about if you're in that role, how you should be thinking, because that's in a way simulating your behavior and prepping you for that discussion. It's also very important that you mentioned having a conversation not only with your manager but other people who could influence and know more about the spot, because that allows you to sort of get some feedback or insight on what that role is all about, because oftentimes we see one side of the role that people are doing but we don't really see the inner works. So having those conversations is indeed valuable. Based on your experience, what are the things that hold people back, even though they really had planned that, they identified the role, they had the conversation? What are the things that hold them back from really diving deep and moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, maybe there's two biggest things. So the first goes back to the idea of inhabiting the role before you have it. And so there's a whole set of behaviors that are behaviors at the level you're at. And they're usually, you talked a little bit about this, but they're about getting stuck in execution. Sometimes they're about not being willing to take risk. Sometimes they're about not seeing the bigger picture. So for example, and this is why having those conversations for the unwritten rules to reveal them is so important. I had a client who her matrix in her organization said, at this level, you're involved in firm leadership and taking on company initiatives and leading those things. And when she actually had a conversation with some of these decision makers and she created enough psychological safety to really hear what the truth was, they said, oh, yeah, that's officially on the documents, but we never promote people if they're too involved with company initiatives because then it looks like they're not really serious about the business.
That's
And so
terrible, right?
it is it's terrible. It's terrible that these unwritten rules exist, but I'm kind of the belief that they're never fully going to go away. And so the
Hmm.
skill to build is to develop the savvy to make those relationships and to find out what those things really are. Because, if you think about it, every single individual role has its own needs and requirements. And some of those are
Hmm.
hard skills and some of those are soft skills. And so companies create these leveling documents because they're trying to be fair and transparent. But in reality, if everybody was cookie cutter and every role was cookie cutter, everybody would you kind of like just push everybody up, every 3 years. And that's just not that's just not the way that it works. And so, yeah, so I think the first thing is, so for example, people who get really involved in firm leadership, that's great. But if those things are not really driving business goals, right? Really focusing on business goals is one of the core things that I see at
Hmm.
different levels. And I think the other thing which is related to that is not being able to speak about your work in a way that really ties to results.
I that's a golden nugget right there. because a lot of people think that it's about the role, but it's about the result. It's about the outcome. So thank you for highlighting that. What's interesting about what you said before was people who are super active with all the initiative in the company sometimes get looked at as like you have too much time on your hand. And I've been in discussion where I heard people talk about like, well, that person seemed to have a lot of time in their hand, so that means they're not really busy in their work. And it's interesting you mentioned that because those are the type of things that people don't think about. Because when people say visibility, so I need to be involved in all of these things, and little did they know that being really involved meant they got looked at differently. So we
Yes.
talk.
Well, so this client who found this out, right? And it was such a perfect expression of how the unwritten rules are so different. Is she was really, really involved, and she also was just so efficient that she got her work done so quickly. And so, but she had a branding problem in her company because people were seeing how involved she was, and they were seeing it as evidence that she wasn't doing her work instead of, no, I'm just three times as productive as everybody else.
Which is kind of sad. We talk a lot about leadership. How about people who are not really aiming to be a leader, but they also want to get promoted because of their efficiency and ability in as a single performer?
Yeah. So the best schema for this that I love is Kim Scott's schema in the book Radical Candor. So she talks about how there's a pathway for people who want to get the next level of their career. They want to go from the manager to the senior manager to head of to director to VP because that's just who they are and how they're oriented and they just want to grow to the next level and learn the new skill set. There are people who actually like their craft. They like being the technical expert or the person
Yeah.
who likes to do what they do. And one of the worst things that we can do is and she calls those the rock stars. And when we're a rock star, when we try to fit ourselves into the path of being somebody who wants to just grow to get promoted, it's not effective. And because we're ending up working against what actually lights us up. And so she talks about how there may not be a next level in terms of title, but there can be ways that those people grow or have different experiences. So there can be special bonuses, there can be special awards, there can be special mentorship opportunities and teaching opportunities. And so I think that there can be times where we're chasing a title because the ego of it, or it might make like maybe our parents are pressuring us, or there's extrinsic reasons why we think we want the title. And I think one of the bravest, strongest things we can do is to get really clear on what actually drives us and then to unhook from what we really don't want, right? Or what we want extrinsically, but not intrinsically. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be able to potentially make more money. Maybe there are bonus structures or raises or
Mm.
ways you can tie your craft to what you're actually accomplishing in the way it drives business value, right? I think there is a lot of worth in being a translator between your craft and the business impact. But one of the worst things that we can do, because I think it ends up tanking our careers when we're not really working to our strengths, is to chase something that you don't really want.
I think that's an excellent point, and a lot of people fall in that trap because they felt like I want the next title, and in order to get the next title, I need to do this. And like you said, if you're a rock star and you're really good at it, and now I made you do something else, it's like asking a fish to swim out, on the land. Like, hey, swim in the land. Like you're not gonna excel, and now you're gonna lose your passion.
Yeah.
As you work with people and trying to find out what they're really good at, because I noticed throughout my career, I noticed that people said, I want to do this and I'm good at this, but then they later on realized that wasn't their strength. Do you have an exercise or something that you do with your client to help them discover what they're really good at?
Yeah. So I have a tool called the four zones of career alignment.
Mm.
And I'll walk your clients through them so they can think about, or your listeners through them so they can think about what might be right for them. But I want to say this can be very hard to do for yourself because you are very close to your own skills and your own interests. And the things that come easy for you, you will undervalue, right? I'm very good, for example, at finding patterns really quickly. And I'm like, oh, that's just so easy. Everybody can do it, but not everybody can do it, right? And so we are likely to undervalue our own things. And so that's why I think it's actually like for me, for example, when I considered a career change, even though I had background as a career coach, I actually looked at hiring another career coach because it's very, very hard to find your own things. But so what I like to do is I like to look at four areas. So the first is what drives you, your skills, your strengths, your
Mm,
interests. So that's everything like the subjects that interest you,
mm,
hard skills, soft skills. And then there's something called the way of being. So it's not really a skill. You could kind of see it as a soft skill, but it's more the way that you like to be lit up. So, for example, I have clients who work in the construction industry and they love being outside. They hate sitting in front of a computer. Or some people really love to collaborate, or some people really love to just put their heads down and really concentrate and solve something thorny. And so it's really thinking about the way of working. It doesn't matter almost what it is you're working on, but how you like to work. The second is the impacts that drive you. And so those can be anything like cares or issues that you really care about, but it can also be your value system. So, for example, I really value honesty and transparency, right? Like that might be something that's really important. And you can look at the match for that both in the way that you want to lead or operate in your career, or this is where there needs to be some match in the company. The third area is your lifestyle goals. So I like to
mm.
think about what do I want my life to be? And therefore, what does my career need to be to support that? So that's everything from how much money you want to make to things like do you want to be traveling or not traveling? Do you want flexibility? Do you want to, like, for example, nurses who have I have a friend who's a emergency room doctor and she loves her lifestyle, but she drives to work at
Mm.
9 p.m. and she comes back, but then she has multiple weeks off and she just like loves that schedule. And some people would hate it, right? So it really is individual to everybody. And then finally, culture. And that's the individual relationships of the people you're working with or who are leading you, but then also the larger culture. And I would say that the more you progress in your career, the more senior you get, the more that culture and relationships piece really starts to matter because as you grow in your career, you become much more specific, right? You have a specific leadership style, you've got value systems, you've got ways you solve problems. And some of the biggest issues I see, especially at the not quite executive level, but I would say right below the executive level, and then at the executive level, is having a mismatch with your company in terms of those things.
I think I find that really interesting about the culture because that's what most people don't think about. They don't think about everything, the job that the role that they want, the experience that they have, but rarely do they talk about the culture. So I really love the fact that your four key area includes culture and also the way of being. Because, like you said, the example you said, I want to be outdoor all day long, being construction, working in construction related business is where I want to be versus sitting on my desk all day long in front of my computer. And I think having people understand that is crucial. So I really love my audience to think about when that you should work with Maya because Maya would walk you through the four areas and help you discover what you really want and the lifestyle based on the lifestyle that you want and how to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah, I think to have that self knowledge, right, to really tune into what really drives you. If you think about it, you're at work for what, 8 hours a day, and it's such a huge component of your life. And so to not align it with what actually drives you is just such a missed opportunity.
It is, it is. And the longer you wait, the longer the desire for you to actually do something about it. It's called the law of diminishing intent, right? If we don't act it today, though we don't act on it tomorrow, then it slowly dissipates. So
Mm.
let's talk about the people who are listening out there who's feeling stuck and wants to level up. How do they engage you and what's the process looks like? Do you accept every single person that comes to you or there's a specific client type that you want to work with?
Yeah, so I work with women and people who identify as women. I do have referrals for other folks if something spoke to them. Anyone who comes my way, I try to at least help them find the next step. But what happens is you book a call with me and we will look at what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to get promoted? Are you trying to pivot and get another job? Are you trying to improve your leadership skills? Are you really confused and you just don't know? I will help you untangle it. And then we'll talk about what it would look like in my program. I have a program called Level Up Leaders where I work with you both individually and also as part of a cohort. Because usually the process of having conversations, with your leadership or networking to find a job with a really confident is something that can bring up a lot of fear,
Mm.
a lot of fear of rejection, a lot of, inhabiting this new identity before you fully owned it is something that takes courage. And so I run my program in cohorts because I see my clients get better results when they, even if they're working on different things, they feel like they're working together and supporting each other. So, yeah, we'll get on a call. We'll decide if it's the right fit. If it's not the right fit, I try to at least give you a next step in another direction.
How do they best reach out and connect with you?
You can actually email me, Maya, Maya, at buildyourselfworkshop.com. And then I do have a special free gift for anybody who's listening that this has really spoken to you, which is a 5-minute assessment, which will help you assess the next level, what's between you and the next level of your career. So there's a couple of key obstacles or places that we get stuck. And this is a 5-minute assessment. I'll ask you a couple of questions and I'll help you pinpoint really, really quickly the next thing you have to resolve, whether it's your skills to create opportunities out of conversations, whether it's to get your positioning tightened, whatever the next thing is for you, I'll help you identify that next obstacle.
Thank you for adding value to my audience and really appreciate you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.